Hello lads, lovelies, and everyone in between. So today, I'm going to be talking about what I think are the unfairly maligned Pimax sword controllers. I've picked up a pair recently, and so far I've quite enjoyed them. So this is part 1 of 2. This is covering my sort of initial impressions and some couple days worth of gaming with these. It's not the full extent. The part 2 will take place in a month's time after I've been using these nothing but for that time. So I've had some real game time in with these and time to earn some muscle memory on these. Because muscle memory is very important when you're switching from very different styles of controls. So here I'm just covering initial impressions. And this 10 games I tried out. Some more than others. And what other sort of problems and odd quirks I may have found in that initial testing. However, there's a lot of interesting things about these controllers I'd like to talk about. First, I think a lot of the problems people had with these controllers is if you squint, they kind of look like knuckles in a way. And in particular, it's this strap. I think that people looked at this strap and were like, oh, it's some kind of knuckle. It's not. I can see why people made that mistake though, because that is the exact same strap. Look, it's the exact same strap. It even has the exact same button, the same fabric. They connect in just about the same way, though this one is spring-loaded rather than just set. Pull the loop in the exact same way. There's a release button that's exactly the same, that's the same part. That's ordered from the same factory. However, really that is actually the only thing they have in common with the knuckles. Well, that and their base station tracked controllers. A little more on that later. So I forget exactly how many tracking sensors the wands had, but I know what the index has. It has 23 tracking sensors. These guys have 52. This giant tracking ring is stuffed with sensors. So that's interesting. It tracks at better angles. It's got higher refresh rate to the system. These probably are better trackers than the knuckles are. They refresh faster. There's more sensors. The angle is much more tolerant. That's something to think about. Although I don't think anyone's ever found their knuckles to be inaccurate really, unless they had like a mirror in the room. But under good conditions, the knuckles are perfectly reliable. But these should be better. Almost twice the sensors, actually more than twice the sensors. But a bit more about how this guy's constructed. First off, it's pretty rugged. This is a good tough controller. Certainly more so than this. I'll get into that a bit later, of course. But a bit about its weird design and why I have this guy with me. Because at first glance, you can see why this might get mistaken for a knuckle, right? I mean, it's got that same band and overall shape, but actually, if you look a little closer, the shape is actually the Quest 2 controller shape. So you can see these two are shaped very similarly. Very similarly. The sword controllers are a little bit chubbier. That's very slightly. The triggers, those are the exact same trigger. And those are the exact same grip button. The only difference is the color of the plastic. They are the same flat. They are the same design. There is another difference though, is that this has a click, much more like the index knuckles. Same with the grip button, and here, it's got a click when it's at its maximum threshold. So if you like that, sword controllers have them. Personally, I do, but I can't say that I've ever been playing a game on my Quest 2 and thought, gee, I missed my click. It's kind of a preference thing, but I like the tactile feedback. As recent as a month ago, maybe even more recent than that, I was actually shitting on these guys pretty hard. Because I was like, man, a trackpad. Surely that's so awkward. And then it's only got one button on its facing if you discount the system button. Which actually you can remap and use if you want, but they always make that deliberately a little awkward to access. However, I got to thinking, do I actually hate trackpads? After all, my favorite controller of all time, the Steam controller, used trackpads. And I absolutely loved this thing. I love my Steam controller. In my opinion, this is still the best controller ever made, and it has no equal or even a remote competitor. I absolutely love the Steam controller. And it's all trackpads. Now, admittedly, the Steam controller was not a success, but it was the perfect controller for just the right kind of geek who doesn't mind spending 3 hours coming up with their own perfect configuration to play a game. And I think that's what really put people off. That, and you simply need different muscle memory to use a trackpad than you do a traditional joystick. That's pretty obvious. And I think that's where a lot of the stuff comes in with these, is that people are just not giving them time to develop the correct muscle memory for this kind of input. Me, I just thought some of the features were so cool in it that I just took the time, and before long, they were completely natural and superior to me even. So given that I like those Steam controllers with their touchpad so much, I thought maybe this is actually worth a look. So I ordered a pair. And they're a pretty good price right now. I ordered their 300 USD base price, so about $70 cheaper than Knuckles. And I got an additional $30 off. And since I will be getting the Lighthouse tracking for the 12K Reality, if you have the store controllers, you get $50 off the Lighthouse module for the 12KR. So that made pretty good sense to me, and if anything else, it's always fun to play with new gadgets. So I decided to order a pair. Let me tell you a little bit though. I think it's fair to say I've never been 100% satisfied with these guys. Yeah, I know that's almost blasphemy to say, certainly in the PC VR community. Often very toxic group who doesn't like to have too many different opinions. Just a fact. But there's some things about this controller that actually really piss me off. I mean, I liked the shape. I've always liked the shape. I think these are comfortable controllers. But the fact that I had to get these boosters was a pain in the ass. And these boosters were expensive. I don't have access to a 3D printer, so I had to go buy some. But there weren't any for sale at all in Canada. I had to order these from the US. These cost me a ridiculous amount of money, like $50 from Kiwi Design. And that was the only option available that didn't look really suspicious and janky. That's bullshit. And you know what that is? Valve's fault for making these controllers so sensitive to the size of your hand. Made the grip sensor very hard to use. So a little more about that grip sensor. No doubt, this is the most immersive way to grab something in VR, right? It feels not exactly the same as grabbing something in real life, but it's closer than what else we have now, right? The problem is it's, in my opinion, unreliably and very janky. A lot of my games, I've had to, well, most games, I've had to go into the controller settings and tweak things so that it would work about right. So that I could pick something up, but I wouldn't have to squeeze it so hard or accidentally drop it. And there's no actual feedback on this grip sensor. So you can accidentally drop something, not notice, and then you find out at a critical moment that you dropped your weapon a while back. Or you fumble a grenade thanks to it, or something like that. A common problem I had with these, even with the boosters, is I had a lot of trouble getting the grip sensor to be configured just right, and in some games, I never got it working correct at all, and ended up having to just switch to toggle grip, which stinks because that's so awkward in my opinion. I hate it. Two games in particular was Vengeful Rights and Beanstalker. I just threw in the towel and set it to toggle grip. And that definitely stinks because for all that the grip sensor style is more immersive than a button, if you have to fall back to toggle, then it's way less immersive anyway. That is opinion though. These were a constant issue. Right, every game it felt like I had to tweak that sensor so that it would grip reliably without being janky. But it was always a little janky anyway. And then say another game like After the Fall, these constantly infuriated me because there my sensor seemed to be working exactly how I'd want it to work. After the Fall gives you a unique challenge compared to most other games like say Pavlov or Contractors where you reload your guns. You do so much reloading in After the Fall. And this is quadruply true if you're using the shotgun where you have to fire in shells into that damn shotgun just as fast as you can. Any moment you're not actively shooting that gun, you need to be pumping rounds into it. And I found that so frustratingly unreliable with the index knuckles. So that kind of got me thinking, you know, I really ought to try the swords, because a simple button is just easier. And I initially complained about this in my Quest 2 review. I was like, yeah, these controllers, you know, the grip button is just not as immersive and I don't like it as much. But I'll say this, it just works. And it works reliably and predictably. And of course, it's a button, so you're not going to accidentally lose just the right threshold for grip pressure. If the button's down, you're holding on to it, such as it is with these. Also, of course, it's tactile. So that is one thing that really got me. Then, of course, the joystick drift problem that I haven't ever had. But that doesn't mean I won't. I kind of feel like a lot of people who are not in that sort of index fanboy category sort of worry that their knuckles are a bit of a time bomb based on that problem of joystick drift in itself. And the warranty on these is only a year. That's not too good for something that is generally considered to be almost an inevitable problem you're going to have with these. Then there's also the other issue, is that this trigger is pathetically fragile. I've seen so many countless pictures of these getting knocked out. They're not really all that rugged, and if you hit them on the side, it's history. So be really careful not to do that. You want to take your blows on the edge, like you can see I have. Now the swords, though, this is the exact same thing as on the good old trusty Quest 2 controller. These things are legendary in terms of their ability to take abuse. Sure, I've seen destroyed ones, but it's so rare. And the difference is, when somebody posts a picture of their destroyed Quest controllers, the comment section is full of shock. How did you do this? Did you hit it with a sledgehammer? What were you doing? Were you hammering nails with it? How did this happen? Right? Not so with this. You post a picture of your broken trigger and people are like, what did you do? Did you breathe on it? Did you look at it harshly? Right? That's a bit of a problem with these. They're not very rugged. But you should be careful with your electronics and not, you know, smash into things with them. So it's always a little bit on you if you destroy these, okay? But not for that joystick. That is a legit problem. And I always hear rumors of people claiming that Valve has secretly fixed these. I think that's complete bullshit. I've never seen any evidence whatsoever for that to be the case, that joystick drift was ever going to get fixed. Doesn't seem to be the case. They just seem content to just repair an RMA. Not a problem on this guy. So there's a lot to say about this here too. Because people think that we've only got the one button, right? That one button, that's not enough. We got 2 on this and 2 on the Quest. Well, actually, that's really not the case. Because what do we have on the Quest 2 controllers, right? Skipping the system button on all of these, because they all have one, and it's all recessed and not meant to be hit unless you very intentionally want to. So a button you would configure for gaming. Although again, technically you can bind that on one of your controllers to something else. I've never done it. Seems way too awkward. And they've deliberately made it awkward on all of these. So you have 2 buttons and a joystick, which you can also use as a button. So we'll say that's 3 buttons and a movement mechanism. 3 buttons and a movement mechanism, but also a touchpad. And here's the neat thing about these guys. You can use that touchpad as a button just fine. It works just fine as a button. And so, for a lot of games, say like Blade and Sorcery, where they foolishly signed jump and kick to pressing the thumbstick down. Well, that's the fast way to get drift. You want to use that as sparingly as you can, because using the joystick as a button is how drift happens, as far as I understand it, or at least accelerates this being a problem. So you don't want to do that. So in games like Blade and Sorcery, I've actually bound things like jump and kick to pressing on the touchpad. That's worked pretty well. You know, but the fact is, you could say there are actually 4 buttons on this. Buttons. But it works like a button, and it works well enough. It's not a problem. And it's a bit sad that it's kind of a requirement. But nonetheless. So what about this? How many buttons do you think are on this? Are you seeing 1, 2, 2, right? 1 and 2? Wrong. Trackpads can be configured to work like a D-pad. So a trackpad can be 5 buttons, potentially, depending on how things are done. My usual way for games is I have my left one for move. I usually have that as just touch. And then this one I keep as click. So you would have something like, jump or kick, and then turn, and then center button for something else. You're actually not wanting for buttons on this at all. You aren't. You have 3 or 4 buttons depending on how you configure this. Same as these other controllers, which people don't complain. There's not enough buttons on their Knuckles or their Quest 2 controllers. And this has at least as many, and potentially even more, depending how you configure that touchpad. So that's something to think about. If you're thinking, why are there so little buttons? Why didn't they add more buttons? That's a bit complicated. I'll get to it. But it's not short buttons. That's certainly a reason why. So if you didn't realize this could also be a D-pad, now you do. Not looking so bad now, is it? So the sort of thing that everyone always brings up about these guys is the finger tracking. Well, this doesn't have finger tracking either, okay? But let's be fair. It has finger tracking sensors, so why don't they work? Well, that's really because of Valve. Because SteamVR is actually not very friendly to third-party stuff. I don't think Valve's done this intentionally exactly, but Valve's fairly inscrutable, and that's where the problem lies. Because if you plug your Sword controllers in, these register as Vive wands. They don't show up as Sword controllers because they have the exact same number of inputs. Of course, the grip button on this is actually easy to access and very convenient, just like it is on the Quest 2 controllers. So the grip button's great. Unlike the wands, where it's that awkward sort of buttony thing, and nobody likes to use it. Not a problem with these guys. So you don't have to sort of configure yourself around that awkward grip button. Very nice, actually. Also about the finger tracking. I've been in contact with Pimax as of a few days ago, and they've confirmed they're still working on getting that finger tracking working. And I think a lot of this has to do with some new changes in SteamVR called controller simulation. There's a fair amount of stuff in the betas about this, and actually currently the latest stable even. So I think what's happening is they're slowly opening up different parts of it to allow controllers to be more flexible in how they're actually implemented in game. And I think that's been the holdup for the finger tracking. So Valve is doing work on this, and I think Pimax is waiting for them and at the moment trying to figure out how this is actually going to work and finally enable that finger tracking. But I am 99.999% sure that the holdup here is Valve, not Pimax. However, Pimax has said pretty clearly that in the short term, we're still going to be waiting for finger tracking. So the reason why your finger tracking is not working on this isn't that Pimax doesn't know how their own sensor works. And let's be honest, the finger sensors, the tracking sensors are probably the exact same part that's in this. Okay? Probably is. The problem is that it shows up as a Vive wand. Vive wand doesn't have a finger tracking sensor. Right? So the games won't look for it. You'd have to make it exactly the same as Knuckles to do that. But they wanted to do something different, I suppose. For whatever reason, this is not a Knuckle. And they couldn't do that either. They couldn't, because there was originally going to be a version closer to this, but they could never get it to work because I'm assuming problems with Valve and SteamVR. Just not that simple. They're the point of complexity. That's why OpenXR will be nice, I suspect, because it's going to solve a lot of these problems that are really to do with Valve's implementation of OpenVR. And there's really nothing anyone can do about it, except Valve. About the tracking ring, it's pretty big, but you're not going to hit it. And I have incredibly thick wrists, perfectly made for firing large magnum revolvers. That's what I was evolved to do. And if my thick-ass wrists aren't hitting this giant ring, then yours won't either. Let's talk a little bit more about this, because they got a fair number of things right on this, actually. But they also made some minor mistakes. First off, this is not the lanyard it came with. It doesn't come with lanyards. I personally think that shipping a motion controller without lanyards is a little insane. I know some people say you don't need them if you have like this style of hand grip, but I've heard of people flinging their knuckles. And I've dropped my knuckles inadvertently. And then I was like, geez, I really ought to put on the lanyard. Also, I just like to have the lanyard so I can let go of the controller, put on my headset, take off my headset, or do whatever. I like having a lanyard. I want one. I don't want to wing my controller at my expensive monitors. So I want a lanyard. What I did initially, actually, was I just took the lanyard off my index controllers. But I don't like to do that. I'd rather just have a lanyard for a controller. And you can see I did that. But the problem is there's no actual way to get these magic valve lanyards. There's just no place to do so. Valve doesn't sell them, and you can't find anyone, and they need to have that really big loop. If you look at the loops on any lanyard you can get on Amazon, they're comparatively tiny. That stinks. And although this does narrow down quite a bit at the bottom, it still wouldn't fit. Clearly I got it to fit somehow. I just used a hair tie. I used a thin little hair tie, and I wrapped it around there, the base. I'll see if I can get that to show. Yeah, you can see I just have a hair tie. And then it just goes in like that. And that's how I attached them. Perhaps a touch ghetto, but it works and it's solid, and it's a solution. You could potentially attach them to the bottom part of that elastic, but I was worried about it creating wear and eventually severing those, and that would be a huge pain in the ass. Same reason you probably wouldn't do that on the index knuckles. Say you lost your lanyard or it broke, well, there's no way to get a replacement. But you could probably do the same thing with a hair tie like I did. So that's just a thought for knuckles people. So Pimax really should have included a lanyard in the box. I'm a little shocked they didn't. And they can still fix that. Pimax, you should find a lanyard and stick it in the box. Next is the batteries. Now, a neat feature of these, so these have user replaceable, readily available batteries. You can just order the batteries off of Amazon. And that's what this guy is. Yeah, it's actually bigger capacity. The ones that come with it are 1090 milliamp hours. This is 1600. Pretty cool. Not sure exactly how much extra battery life translates to, maybe an extra hour. To be fair, replaceable battery is kind of a useful feature in this. This guy gets a huge amount of battery life. Something like 7 or 8 hours. Although I've heard games that use a lot of heavy haptics, can be as low as 4. That's still a friggin' long time. That's a lot of gaming. These guys get about 3, maybe 4 hours of battery life on a charge. These charge, however, very fast. They go from empty to full in about an hour and a half with the stock 1090 milliamp hour batteries. But you can just replace the batteries. And I picked up a charger and 3 of these batteries. It was $36 for 3 batteries and a 3-bay charger. So if I was going to be playing for a really extended session, I could just pop out the batteries, replace them on the charger, and theoretically I can just play forever. Not so with any other controller, really, although technically these guys have such a ridiculously long battery life. It just kind of doesn't matter, right? Like you're playing for a month long? Anyway, and even so, they're easily, quickly replaced. But that's actually one minor thing, though. Another tiny little oversight is that there's actually no way to easily remove the battery from these. I sort of engineered something just like I did at the lanyard. So you remove the battery cover. Now, it's a little bit hard to see there. But you can see I got a little piece of transparent, what's that? Now you give it a pull, and the battery comes out nicely. But that wasn't there. This is actually a piece of plastic that they supplied with the USB charging cables. I just cut a piece of that and used the glue it came with and stuck, that was like already on it. And I stuck it in there and made a little pull tab you could use to get your batteries out. But otherwise, there's this tiny little hole. I'm not even, yeah, you can still see it, that little groove. Best I could tell you, like stick a screwdriver down there. Well, you don't want to do that. That's not handy or convenient at all. So there's that my little life hack for this. And I sort of wonder why they didn't put a little piece of ribbon in there you could tug. I've seen it in all sorts of electronics, and it's strange that they didn't think of that. After all, there's no actual quick way to remove the batteries outside of that. Although once you do that, the batteries are quick and easy to swap. Anyway, so that's interesting, and I like the idea of using replaceable batteries. Because, batteries do fatigue over time, and I've not really heard that being so much of a problem with the knuckles. Depends how long, they work, and how long they last before joystick drift causes you to RMA it. Still, I do like the idea of having replaceable batteries. That's a nice feature, and really doesn't affect the form factor in any way. I mean, you could fit all sorts of stuff in this probably. So let's talk about actually using these. So as expected, when I first got these, I struggled a little bit to get used to the touchpads. Didn't take me that long to kind of get a pretty good groove on them though. And after a while, in a lot of games I was playing, I had no problems. Although I'm still somewhat getting used to them, it is quite a bit different. But I'm not struggling. I'm not struggling at all. However, one weird thing, and this is really something I'm sure Vive wand owners are super familiar with, there's not a lot of consistency between the controls in games. Some games will have you click to move or turn. Other games you just touch, depending. Personally, I like touch to move and then click to turn because I get more buttons out of this, and I like to sort of rest my thumb there a little bit. It depends. You're almost always moving in games anyway. That's what I found just worked naturally for me. But I've made a list of 10 games I've tried. Saints and Sinners I tried out, and that was just perfect. It was just fine, no problems. And some of the control options, whether like touch to move or click to move, were actually right in the game's settings by default. So that's perfect. You just choose whatever you like, you're done. No Man's Sky was the next game I tried. Now, No Man's Sky's VR controls are interesting. They're interesting on the knuckles, they're interesting with the Quest 2, and they're exceptionally interesting with this. They worked, you know, and I didn't have any real trouble because I already went through all the trouble of learning the basic controls with the knuckles. Going to this wasn't that different. But I did have to look up something hilarious. How to walk. I couldn't figure that out for the life of me. Neither trackpad did it. I was like, what on earth? To walk, you have to click the left trigger. What? Because you have to like point where you want to go, and then you click the left trigger and your character toddles on over. You can change the movement direction to like head-based or another option, I forget. But then you can't swim in water, and you need to swim in water in that game. So you have to use controller-based movement direction. So to walk backwards, you have to put your arm behind your back and then click the trigger. It is incredibly awkward. But in vehicle controls and space controls, everything was obvious and worked perfectly. So you might be able to devise, and probably should, devise your own ground-based movement controls that are less awful. Because, wow, that's pretty awful. I don't know, I haven't done it yet, because I don't know, maybe I'll just get used to it and stop caring. But that's just weird, that's weird. Why is the controls like that? There's so many different options. You can configure a Vive wand, or a sword controller in this case. That would be so much better. I'm sure there's a ton of community controls available. I haven't changed with that yet. But hey, it did work. But I had to look up how to do it. Pavlov was perfect. No problems. I think it's that touch to turn by default, so easily changed. After the Fall, that game is click to turn, which I now prefer, but you actually can't change it to touch to turn even if you want to. It just doesn't work for some reason. I don't know. I suspect this is Unity shenanigans as usual. Vengeful Rights was the same thing. Now, I could always change it from touch to move or click to move whenever I wanted for any game, but for the right controller, I couldn't do a whole lot in that regards, and I never figured out why. So same thing with After the Fall and Vengeful Rights. Very strange. Other than that, easy. Beanstalker was perfect. Cosmo Dread was perfect. Again, one or two games I changed from touch to move or turn to move or just whatever. That's such a trivial setting to change, not a problem. And certainly less problems than spending all the time getting the grip sensor to be configured exactly correct, and sometimes not at all. Into the Radius was perfect. Half-Life Alyx, a little strange, but I understand what happened here. Exactly. And Vive wand users do too. That is that they use the trigger to grab. Awkward if you're using a controller with a perfectly good grip button. Not a problem, and you could probably switch it pretty easily. But that was something I noted is odd, is trigger to grab. It's actually not the only game that does that. Legendary Tales does that too, even on the knuckles. I guess I got used to it. Now, Lashley's Blade and Sorcery. This one was a strange one. Yeah. And I've heard somebody saying they had this issue with another game as well. I forget why, or they didn't say. But that was I couldn't walk forward. I could move in every direction but forward. So I fiddled around with a bunch of settings and I eventually found what I needed to change. Something called the curve exponent. I don't know what that means. But when I set that down to 25, then I could move just fine. So if you ever have a game where for some reason you can't walk forward, like it wanted you to touch the absolute farthest leading edge of that, which is kind of awkward because my thumbs are long enough I could do it, but not consistently, and it was weird, and you were off by so much as a millimeter, you couldn't walk forward. Very strange. Very strange. But changing that curve exponent to 25 just fixed it. And then from then on, the swords were awesome and blade and sorcery, maybe. Anyway, sorry. So those are 10 games I tried, relatively briefly. So that's why this is going to be part 1 of 2. So far, I've actually rather liked these. I found them to be very comfortable to use. And like I said, the trackpads are an entirely different set of muscle memory, okay? And that's the important thing that, especially for a lot of people who are raised on very traditional, what are now traditional joystick controllers, such as the PlayStation 4 controllers or the Xbox controllers, and just never really tried anything different. I mean, I started playing games in 87. I'm used to all sorts of wacky and frankly genuinely awful controllers, such as this awful thing, for example. I played games on that. You think trackpads might be awkward? I don't think you're right, but nothing compared to that thing. Anyway, so I'm used to using a lot of weird controllers. I'm flexible in that regard. So far I've found the trackpads to be accurate, easy to use. I mean, there's no thumb fatigue on that sort of thing. This is not a huge issue, I think, for gamers getting thumb fatigue. Really? I don't think so. But nonetheless, it is less effort to use a trackpad than it is a joystick. That is true. You can just rest your thumb on it. Right? It's like the laziest way to move. Yeah, and I haven't felt like I'm short on buttons. Because you can configure the, and a lot of games already do configure the trackpad to be a D-pad as necessary, and it works awesome. Again, a game like Blade and Sorcery, I like the controls on this quite a bit more than I do, well, now that I fixed them, than I did on this, where I had to rebind to avoid having my joystick wear out sooner than it should. And even then, pressing the joystick to jump, not my favorite, because I'd often find I'd drift slightly when I push down and I'd jump in an unexpected direction or start turning halfway through a jump. Never had the issue with these. For these guys, I just press up to jump, down to kick. Same controller even. Where on these guys, I had to map jump to one touchpad and kick on the other. That's the solution I came up with to save my joysticks. But if you're going to talk about these things as if they're like the end-all be-all controllers, well, you're definitely wrong, right? Like, surely you know that. The fact that you have to do weird shit to save your controller joystick from drifting, the fact that it's such an issue and probably never going to be fixed, says that there's definitely room for a competitor, and that's these guys. But you have to be willing to get some different muscle memory. You have to spend some time with it and realize there will be a break-in period where you have to just become used to doing this. And I haven't seen other reviewers doing that. They pick it up, they try it for a little bit, and go, blah, I just want my joysticks. Okay? That's not a real review anyway. Frankly, it's a little bit lame for all those guys who are just like, no, touchpads are bad. Really? You didn't give it a fair try. And how inflexible are you? Like, for part 2, I'm going to do that in no earlier than about a month's time. And I've been using nothing but these, and I will continue to use nothing but these for an entire month, and I will come back, and I will tell you, after a month of pretty steady use, how I feel about these after that much time. And that is really the only fair way to review something like this, right? Because it is just a different form factor. If you're not going to do the time to get that muscle memory, you're not giving it a fair review. So I'm going to give you a fair review. In a month's time or so, I'll be back and do part 2 of this. Lads, lovelies, everyone in between, that's my review of the Pimax sword controllers. That is Pimax Sword Science with Dr. JameJame. NAD. I will see you next time. Thank you for your likes, your subscribes, your shares, and your comments. Small channels like mine really depend on that. So thank you very much. All right, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.